Okay, did everyone? Perfect. Okay. Okay, welcome to Educator's Edge Enhancing Instruction. Today we'll be covering the TEK 5.7b, dealing with experimental investigation of forces. Those of you who are viewing this asynchronously, you need the following materials. And so if you don't already have them available, if you'll pause this and collect those items before moving forward with the session. Okay, we are your presenters today. I'm Kristen Conrad. We also have Amy Snyder and Jenna Houdon. They are science ISTs, and we're very excited about today's session. Today, you are going to uncover, by the time you leave today, you're going to understand the targeted TEK. We're going to analyze assessment questions. You're going to experience a lab, and we'll wrap up by reviewing some instructional materials you have available to support you in your instruction. Some norms for our session. We do ask that you please keep your camera on. This is an interactive session, so please have those on. Use the chat to participate throughout the session and honor the time by staying until the very end and making sure you fill out your feedback form to make sure you receive credit. Also, if you have any questions regarding any resources that pop up or anything outside of the interactive pieces, if you'll drop them in the chat, and we have some time at the end of the session where we will be sure to address those. All right, so we are going to jump in and we're going to start with some historical data. This is why we are here today. This is what makes this TEK a hotspot. In 2024, as a district, we had 19%. And last year we did go up to 40%. And this was a hotspot TEK last year. So we did already have some demo videos and scripts available for you. And so this year, to try to help us keep our momentum, we are adding this PD to our support. And then last year on the unit assessment, where fifth grade had 34%. So let's jump into unpacking the TEK. So here's the full TEK. Designed a simple experimental investigation that tests the effect of force on an object in a system, such as a car on a ramp or a balloon rocket on a string. So if you and your teammates or whoever you're with, or if you're by yourself, if you'll start by identifying the verb or verbs and drop that in the chat. And then also, what is the content in the TEK, the content piece? So if you'll kind of discuss those two pieces and drop them in the chat when you're ready. Okay, we have design and test dropped in the chat. Very good. And then what is the content, or some of the phrases that target the content? Very good. Hi, I'm fifth grade team at Mora. Very good. Test the effective forces, experimental investigation. Excellent. And then here is also with the TEK, we have the learning target, just so you can kind of see the learning target is there to either bring clarity around the TEK, add some additional information. Sometimes we have TEKs where we break them into separate learning targets because they're long. This one, the TEK itself was pretty great, so we didn't change it a whole lot, but we just simplified it a little bit by leaving out the examples. Okay, so you guys pretty much nailed it with design. didn't even catch test. That should be in pink too. That is a verb. And the content is simple experimental investigation that tests the effect of force on an object in a system. And one thing to note with this TEK is it includes a such as. So it does say such as a car on a ramp or a balloon rocket on a string. So those are two examples of systems, but they are not the only all-encompassing systems that students need to experience. They're just two examples. The other thing I wanted to take a quick minute to highlight is that this TEK in particular already includes the three-dimensional TEKs. So it already includes a science and engineering practice and two RTCs, or reoccurring themes and concepts. So I have the TEKs listed below. So if you and your group will see if you can identify the science and engineering practice within the TEK, and if you can find clues for the reoccurring themes and concepts in the TEK. All right, and if you'll give me a thumbs up when you've identified those. Forgot to tell you how to do a thumbs up. You can just give me a real thumbs up on your camera. I don't even know. Oh, there we go. I see some thumbs ups on your cameras. Okay, so I will go ahead and show you. We kind of color coded them. So one of our science and engineering practices is just for students to plan and conduct a descriptive and simple experimental investigation. So that's a big chunk of this TEK. One of the reoccurring themes and concepts is to identify and investigate cause and effect relationships. So when we look at the effects of force on an object, that is a cause and effect relationship. And then finally, we're looking at systems, which goes with the reoccurring theme and concept of examine and model the parts of a system. And so this TEK in itself already includes all TEKs from all three dimensions. All right, so let's take a look at how this TEK looks on your unit assessments. We did make some adjustments. So if you taught this last year, we did make some changes to your unit assessment. So be sure to take a close look at that. I think last year we had one question for this TEK and it had two parts. And the second, I believe, second part was even a short constructed response. This year we changed that a little bit. So this is one of your questions. So I'm going to give you a minute to read that and discuss with your team what impacts on instruction this unit assessment question has. What will students need to know and what will students need to do to be successful on this question? And if you'll drop any ideas or keywords into the chat when you're ready. Good. Someone said dependent and independent variables. Vocabulary terminology of independent and dependent variables. Very good. Definitely, and if you're not careful, that's an easy one to not focus on. So that's why we wanted to make sure we had it in the unit assessment to help make sure students are getting plenty of exposure and practice to understanding what those variables are and how to identify them in an investigation. This is another question. This is a new question on your unit assessment. So again, take a look at it and drop in the chat. What are some things students will need to know and do during the unit to be able to be successful on this question? Good. Friction is definitely a vocabulary word students are going to need to know throughout this unit. Good. Someone says the constant to improve the investigation. How much more force in the balloon? Need to know what twine is. Very good. So this particular question was formatted in a way that was similar to a question that was asked on last year's STAR. And if we have to be really careful that we are allowing students to identify errors in investigation setups and how they can correct those, right? So I think we have too many variables in this question. So to improve it, they need to just make one of those controlled, which the answer choice would be use the same size of a balloon for each trial. So that's just make sure you're really careful with this as you're going through investigations with your students. And then this is another question on your unit assessment. If you guys will drop in the chat anything students will need to know and do. So it's a consistency of distance traveled. Also, someone saying that knowing what twine is, using twine in the investigation would definitely help ensure students knew that. Students are going to need to know how friction affects distance. Good. They're going to need to use different surfaces and test that. Good. Okay, I want to make sure we keep going because we have a lot to get through today. This is the STAR assessment question that I mentioned earlier that we kind of used this as an inspiration for the other one. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at this. Okay, this is just another example of there being more than one variable, like independent variable. You can only have one. So taking one of those and making it a constant. So I think in this one, it's C, they need to place each magnet at the same distance from the paper clips. And then collect the number that are attracted. And if I'm wrong, I'm so sorry, I forgot to review this. Okay, so with that said, that's kind of the why behind why we're all here today to try to increase student achievement on this standard as a district. So I'm going to now hand it over to Amy.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Very good. So I'm going to get started with the model lesson for this learning target. So a little bit of a disclaimer before we get started. So within this learning target, we have a variety of resources available for you to present opportunities for students to get the experience of working with force investigations. Now, we know when we went through and unpacked the TEAK, we know that this is challenging. So students are expected to design and test an effective force investigation. And we know that as an explorer, they may not discover that on their own without some teacher guidance. So the way that it is laid out in the curriculum is as a gradual release. So it's an I do, we do, you do set of investigations. So as I'm going through the model lesson, I'm going to kind of quickly go through the I do as a teacher, and then I'll do a little bit more interactive, or I'll ask for your participation in the we do, and then we'll just go through some highlights of the other components of the different investigations that are available. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So now I'm going to put on teacher hat and act as if you are the students. So today we're going to be investigating force. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so today you are going to be designing and conducting a force investigation. So we're going to be collecting our observations and collecting data and organizing it into a data table in our science notebooks. And we're really going to look closely at how force can affect different objects within a system. So as we're going through this investigation, I want you to pay close attention to, are there any cause and effect relationships as we're looking at our system? And also, what are the parts of our system? So we're going to make those connections as we go through designing our investigation. And so now I'm going to go over to my dry erase board over here. Can y'all see the board? Good. Okay. So we're going to start off with the I do. So for this part, as a teacher, you're going to really be doing a majority and modeling your thinking process for your students. So when you're going through experimental design, these are really the steps that you're going to follow for the I do, the we do, and students will be expected to do for the you do. So I'm going to start off just from the beginning. So this is my car ramp system. So when you're designing a force investigation, you first want to think about the parts of your system. So looking here, I have a ramp. So I built my ramp from books, and then I built my ramp from the clipboard. It's going to be the surface of my ramp. And then I have my toy car as well. Now, I want to think about what are some things that I can change about my system, because that's really going to turn into my variables, a word that we're going to learn about here in a little while. So some things I can change about my system. Well, I can change the height of my ramp. So I can take away books to change the height of my ramp. I can also change maybe the length of my ramp, so I can add additional length. I can also change my car, so I could use a different car, or I can change the mass of my car, or even use a different surface for the ramp, right? So these are all things that I can change in my system. But for today, for this investigation that I'm going to show you, I'm going to be changing the height of my ramp. And so teachers, as you're teaching this, you can utilize these basic materials of the books and the clipboard and a toy car, or you can also utilize your smart school ramp as well when you're doing the I do portion, which is this. And so then I would think, let the students know all of these force investigations, they're going to start with a question. And so a question, your sentence stem could be, how does blank affect blank? And so the question that I'm trying to answer with my investigation today is, how does changing the height of the ramp affect the distance traveled by the car? So my question is, how does changing the height of the ramp affect the distance traveled by the car? So some materials that I need in order to answer that question, well, of course, I need my ramp, and I'm going to change the height by adding and removing books. I have my ramp surface, which is my clipboard. I'm also going to need my toy car. Now, I also need a tool to measure the distance traveled, because that's what I want to figure out, is how it affects the distance. So I'm going to measure the distance using my meter stick. And so those are the materials that I need. So when I'm designing my experiment, I also need to collect data, right? So which is going to lead to my results of the investigation. So the data that I'm going to collect are tied to my question. And so I want to figure out, how does changing the height of the ramp, so I would measure the height of the ramp. I could either say 1 book, 2 books. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so how does changing the height of the ramp affect the distance traveled by the car? So I can adjust the height of the ramp by the number of books. I can even measure the height of my ramp, and then I would measure the distance using the meter stick. And then also, when good scientists will conduct several trials. So a trial is going to be when you perform the investigation one time. So in order to perform a reliable experiment, you want to repeat and have at least 3 trials for each part of your investigation. So when I perform this, I'm going to do it 3 times when I collect my data. And I'm going to organize my data into a data table that looks like this. So I have 3 trials, 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to adjust the height of my ramp 3 times. So I'm going to do the low height, a medium height, and the greatest height. And then I'm going to collect my data, measuring the distance each time. And so then I'm going to be thinking about, okay, what are the steps of my investigation? So I'm going to measure them 3 different times. So I'll start at the lowest height, measure 3 times, then go to my medium height, measure 3 times, and then go to my greatest height, and then measure 3 times and record that data in my data table. Now, when we're thinking about variables, right, that word is part or changes in your system. And so an independent variable, that means a variable that I change. So within my system here, the variable that I'm changing is the height of my ramp. And so I'm changing the height by adding and removing books. So that is the independent variable. That's what I change. The dependent variable is what changes as a result of the independent variable. So for this, our dependent variable is going to be the distance that is traveled. So the dependent variable is the distance, the independent is what I change. That's going to be the ramp height. And then I would develop my hypothesis. So my hypothesis is my prediction of what I think the results will be to my investigation. And I can use this if-then sentence stem to create my hypothesis. So I could say, I think that if the height of the ramp increases, then the car will travel a greater distance. So that could be my guess of what I think may happen, and then I would perform the investigation. And so then you would go through and collect that data with your students. You have class data. They can also record this in their science notebooks, and that would be your I do. So then following the I do, then you would conduct a we do. And so this time, the first time I was really asking the questions and answering my own questions or modeling the thinking. And so this time we really want to get the students involved in providing answers to those questions. So they're having a hand in designing this experiment. So at this point, I would like for if you could please respond to my questions in the chat as if you were your materials to go ahead and have your ramp and then also your surfaces. So we said to have 3 different surfaces based on what was available to you. I'm going to be using sandpaper, foil, and foam, but you can use whatever you have available along with a ramp, a meter stick, or you could use a timer and a toy car. So you can gather those materials with your team. And again, as I'm going through this process, if you can respond like a student into the chat, because again, we're going now into the we do portion of the experimental investigations. Okay, students, so we just finished the I do portion of our force experimental investigation. So yesterday we created an experiment where we investigated how changing the height of the ramp affected the distance traveled by the car. So I'd like for us to, again, look at the parts of our system. So we're still working with our car ramp system. So if you could go ahead and answer in the chat, what are the parts of our system? So what are the parts of our system?
Car, ramp, books.
Car, ramp, books, very good. So think about the changes that we can make to the system. So you said the books, right? So the books make up the height of the ramp. So yesterday, that's the variable that we changed. Someone also mentioned the clipboard, right? This is the surface of our ramp. So we can also change the length of our ramp, or we can change the surface. And then I also heard someone say car. So we could also change our car by adding additional mass to the car or using a different car with different wheels. So we can change all of these parts of our system in order to design an experiment and a question to test. So today we are going to investigate the question. Yesterday we changed the height, okay? So today we are going to change the surface of the ramp. So our question that we're going to answer together is, how does changing the surface of the ramp affect the distance traveled by the car? So if you could go ahead and answer in the chat, what materials am I going to need in order to test that question? So what materials do we need? We want to test the question, how does changing the surface of the ramp affect the distance traveled by the car? So what materials do we need? Okay, felt. I heard someone say felt, foam, sandpaper, foil. So different surfaces, right? Very good. So we're going to use foam, and you're going to use what you have available, but you would use 3 different surfaces to test. And then we also, of course, still need our ramp system. Very good. Now, how could we collect, what data are we going to need to collect for this investigation? So if you can put your answers in the chat, what data do we need to collect for this investigation? Distance, travel, very good. So we're going to record our distance. Material used. What type of material that we're using, we have to record that in our data table as well. Very good. Okay, so we need to know the type of material and the distance traveled. Now, thinking about distance, we also need a science tool to measure that data, right? So what type of tool do we need to measure distance? Okay, meter stick, very good. And in this one, you could also, teachers, you could also have them measure the speed using a timer, like whenever the car crosses a certain finish line, for example, they can use a stopwatch or timer as well. Okay, so we're going to organize our data using our data table. Now remember, we talked about trials when we did our previous investigation. In order to perform a reliable investigation, how many trials should we do? 3 trials, very good. So we're going to perform 3 trials for every single surface type that we have available. Okay, so now let's think about our variables here. So remember yesterday we talked about how when we changed the ramp height, that affected the distance traveled by the car. And we said that the independent variable, that's what I change, right? So in this investigation that we're doing together, what is the independent variable? What am I changing in this investigation? The surface, very good. So the surface type or material is going to be our independent variable. And then what is going to change as a result of that change? What's our dependent variable? Distance, very good. So what I want you now to talk with your group, and I want you to come up with a hypothesis. What do you expect to happen in this investigation, or what do you think your results will be? So take a moment, discuss with your table group, and then you can record your hypothesis in the chat. Very good. The smoother the surface, the farther the car goes. Very good. Car will travel farther with a smooth surface. Very good. Very good. So started your hypothesis, so now you're going to go ahead and perform that investigation and collect your data. Now remember, a reliable investigation has 3 trials, and we're going to use the 3 trials for our 3 services that are available to us. So now we're going to go ahead and give you some time to work with your team to perform that investigation. And I know that not everyone has the camera, and that's okay if you're on a desktop, but if you do, we would love to spotlight some campuses that are collecting that data. So we'll go ahead and give you a couple of minutes to perform that investigation and then collect your data for the week. Okay. Okay, thank you everyone for participating and working with your teams. We loved seeing you perform the force investigations and collecting your data and doing a good trial run before you go through this with your students. So once we all come back together and really look at our data, another good strategy could be that within where students are collecting data to once again label the variables in the investigation. So here we changed the surface type, so that would be our independent variable. And our question was, how does changing the surface affect the distance traveled by the car? So the distance traveled was our dependent variable. And so I marked that on my data table. You can instruct your students to do the same. So that was the we do. You're doing the questioning, but really your students are providing the answers to the questions and designing their own investigation that they can carry out in groups with their classmates, but getting their hands on the materials. We also mentioned earlier when Kristen was giving the questions that it's really important that students have the experience with different surface types. And so just always remembering to prioritize them getting their hands on the materials and having experiences with the force investigations. So after that would be the you do. And so now you've done the I do, which was changing the height of the ramp. You went through the you do, which was changing the surface of the ramp. And so now we're at you do, which is where we want students really to do most of this planning, of course, with your support, right? And so a good way to, ease them into that with some support is by having them once again look at the parts of the system. So again, we have our car ramp system. We have our ramp. We talked about how we can change the height of the ramp, and we can also change the surface of the ramp. And if you can respond in the chat, what have we not yet changed about our system? Is there anything that we have not yet changed? Length of the ramp, very good. So maybe we use another material and change the length of the ramp, very good. The car, the mass of the car, very good. Also, both times in the I do and the we do, we measured distance. So potentially the you do would be a great opportunity for students to measure speed or time it takes to cross the finish line. And so having them develop their question by making a change to one of the parts of the system. So that's where they can start. And that's really having them utilize those variables so you can change the independent variable and then choose how you think that's going to affect the dependent variable. And so that part they would do mostly on their own, but of course with you there to support them through that process. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to, so that was the explore, the gradual release. And so now I'm going to show you here. Did it switch over to? Very good. So now as part of our explain and the resources for this learning target, we provided this spring scales activity for you to use with your students. So in the gradual release, we know that TEAC is very challenging because it incorporates both content with the effects of force, but also experimental design as well. And so within that gradual release, we're really explaining to students the process of experimental design while they're exploring the effects of force. And so this resource can really help you to do some further explanation with the effects of force and things like friction and gravity that you all mentioned earlier in the chat. And so this is meant, it's a Canvas slides presentation, and it is meant to be student facing. So we'll just show you just some highlights of it. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but we'll show you some highlights. So students, and it tells the students the directions of what they are to do on the slide itself. So you can present this when you're in the classroom, and students can perform these little mini phenomena using the spring scales. Now, something to note is that across the campuses, we've seen a variety of different types of spring scales. These are just some of the varieties we've come across. So just so you all know, the units of measurement for a spring scale could be in grams or it could be in newtons, which is the measurement of force. And both of them are fine, but they have different capacities. And so some of the spring scales will go to 500 grams, some of them only go to 100 grams, or it could go to 1 Newton, 5 newtons. So it just depends. So the way that this was written for the spring scales investigation was we had students tie a string around a notebook because we felt like these materials were easily accessible. But if you find that your spring scale capacity is not, it doesn't hold that, or it's too much, then you could also utilize your science topic readers for Savas, which have a much smaller mass, so that you can utilize your spring scales and just use the same steps. Just instead of using a composition notebook, using the readers, if you have a spring scale where the capacity is lower. Okay, so they'll have the opportunity to drag their notebook across a smooth surface compared to a rough surface. So really examining the effects of friction on a pool. And so it instructs them to draw and record that system in their notebook and then label the forces that are present. And then it also has them do that with a ramp as well. And so multiple opportunities for students to have experience with those forces and the effects of friction and gravity, and then also adding additional mass and using the spring scales to measure force. Okay. And then last part, so I'm going to go back to my camera. Camera, there we go. Can you see the camera? Very good. So the last part of the resources for this learning target is the balloon rocket investigation. And so this is listed as part of the elaborate. So at this point, we really want students to be designing these investigations on their own. So a good segue into that is just to show students the balloon rocket system. So Jenna and I are going to show that to you first, and then we'll have you answer some questions in the chat. So here is our balloon rocket system. Okay, now I may call up a student to hold the other end of the string and then just demonstrate a balloon rocket system. So I would show the students, check this out, it's really cool. Show them, okay? And then I would show them the system. So I can show you, okay, what are the parts of this balloon rocket system? So if you can answer in the chat, what are the parts of the balloon rocket system? Straw, string, balloon, and tape. Very good. So today, students, you are going to design your own investigation using this system. So you told me that the parts are the string, the straw, and the balloon. So what can you change about the string? You can change the type of string, right? We could use twine. Like we said, we can use fishing line, we can use yarn. We can change the shape of the straw or the type of the straw, and we can change how big the balloon or how much we inflate the balloon. All of those are changes that we can make. And so you're going to use this experimental design process to choose what you're going to change about your balloon rocket system, and then collect your data like we have been using these steps. Okay. And so that was the highlights of all of the force investigation resources for this learning target.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Yes, beautiful. So with the time that we have left, we are going to chat about some of the resources that you have available to you. So you guys are familiar with our curriculum, and in our curriculum, there is the teacher clarification section. And in this section, you will find a variety of things such as definitions. Sometimes you'll see support images to help you in carrying out the investigations and explorations for your students. So always check out that teacher clarification section. This one has things such as experimental investigation. It gives you those examples of variables. And then it talks to you about that gradual release model that you'll be using to support your students in this. In this section, we've also generated for you this chart. So we know it's challenging to introduce and keep reiterating that vocabulary of independent variable, dependent variable. And so we made this chart for you to help you with that. So remember the TEAC is a such as. So it's such as a car ramp system or a balloon rocket system. Keep that in mind. We have given you other examples as well too, so we can really meet the depth and the breadth of that TEAC. So we have that to support you as well. In the resource section, you have it broken into the 5 E's. What Amy went over with you guys is the explore portion. So you'll carry out that explore, and you have a total of 5 days for this learning target. So when we added the spring scales, we also gave you an extra day to be able to do that. So you have 5 days to really carry out this hotspot TEAC with fidelity. Here are your resources for the I do that you saw Amy go over with you. You have the script, you have the chart, and then don't forget the yellow box that has the follow-up questions and the data dive. That data dive is really key to supporting your students in not only generating data, but synthesizing and making sense of data and analyzing it. We've also updated that data dive. So if you haven't looked at it recently, please do that. Take a look. Here are your resources for the we do that Amy chatted with you about. Again, script, chart, and those follow-up questions with the data dive. And then lastly, the you do. It's a lot less, right? Because the weight then is on the students. And so there's less for you in the script. The chart is blank because it's going to depend on what they decide they're going to test, right? And then again, that data dive to support your students in analyzing the information at the end to answer that guiding question. This is a resource that Amy shared with you briefly for the explain. This will help you make sure your students have experience with spring scales because we know that's oftentimes on STAR. So we wanted to make sure you guys have that experience. Your Savas resources are always awesome for you to carry out an explain portion as well. Here you see key ideas presentation, activity, and video. The elaborate is going to be the balloon rocket experience, or not experiment, exploration that you saw Amy and I do. And this will really allow them to take all the learning they did and that gradual release that I do, we do, you do, and take ownership and carry it out fully and completely with this balloon rocket system, which is the, good part of an elaborate. They take it, they learn it, and they do it. So with your evaluate, lastly, you've seen these in your curriculum, the short constructed responses. And so we heard feedback and we heard y'all, and we didn't, want you guys to just practice short constructed response for STAR review. So now you have them within your curriculum in all units, so you can really start supporting your students and attacking these sort of short constructed response questions with fidelity. So lastly, we come to our supporting diverse learners. You guys are well aware, you're teachers, we have a wide variety of kiddos in our classrooms, right? And so how are we going to support them? Well, one of the things your curriculum has is visuals. Remember, you have the visual non-glossary icon on your portal. That's where this image is from, that you can pull very specific vocabulary images. And don't be afraid to also search for something in Google. If VNG, which is what we call it, if VNG doesn't have an image for a certain word, you could put your own together too if you so choose, if you find they're really helpful for your kiddos. And then also sentence stems and frames. So you heard Amy use that sentence frame, if, then. That's also a tool to support our learners. So keeping all of that in mind, you have a lot of supports, and you also have us to help you carry this out the best for your students as possible. Do we have any questions?
Jenna, there's a question about the icon in the portal. So there's an icon for the visual non-glossaries in the portal.
I'm so sorry. Kristen, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. I was talking to Amy and she was like, I don't know. And then I realized y'all couldn't hear me. So here in the portal, this is my screen, so your portal might look a little bit different. The visual non-glossary icon is right here. And so you would open up visual non-glossary, and then like the one that we had was force, you just simply go to the search right here, type in force. You're going to want this science version. You see all sorts of other ones pop up, right? Notice here you could also search by subject, so you don't have that happen to you. And then when you click on it, you're seeing all of these that are force. You're probably noticing some that look familiar too, right? Like balanced force, applied force. Special note, Savas calls them, they call them, what is it, uneven? No, what is it?
Equal.
Thank you. Yes, they call them equal and unequal forces. So if you so choose to use the VNG, the balanced and the unbalanced, just let your kiddos know that that's used interchangeably. Oh yes, good question. That is the visual non-glossary icon. Again, it looks like this right here in your portal. Any other questions? That was a great one. No? Okay, well, we are going to stop recording now.
Um, Really quickly, if you're watching this asynchronously, this is when you will go to take your quiz in Schoology to get credit. Those of you that are with us live, if you'll just stay on, and our next slide is going to be your feedback form to make sure you get credit. Now let me remember how to stop recording.